He was a journalist, a novelist, a poet, a debater, and one of the largest men ever to walk into a room, in every sense of the word. He wrote over 100 books, thousands of essays, and more paradoxes per sentence than anyone in the English language. He was also, by his own admission, a very unlikely Christian. G.K. Chesterton, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Though I will say that I have never met a podcast before, but I find I am already in favour of anything that involves sitting down and talking. It is the natural human activity. Everything else is just interruption.
That's going in the intro. Let's start with the modern world, because you spent your entire career arguing with it. What is your fundamental problem with modernity?
My fundamental problem is that it is not nearly as modern as it thinks. The modern world congratulates itself on having abandoned superstition and embraced reason. But it has not abandoned superstition. It has merely changed its superstitions. The man who no longer believes in God does not believe in nothing, he believes in everything. Astrology, political utopias, the perfectibility of man through the right economic system. He has traded one creed for a dozen and considers himself liberated.
That's a point you made famous. When a man stops believing in God, he doesn't believe in nothing, he believes in anything.
Yes, and people always look surprised when I say it, as though it were a paradox, but it is simply observation. A man needs something to organize his life around. Remove God, and the space does not stay empty. It fills immediately, with ideology, with nationalism, with the worship of progress, with whatever the fashion of the moment happens to be. The question is never whether a man will believe. The question is only what he will believe, and whether what he believes is worth believing. Nobody has any business to use the word progress unless he has a definite creed and a cast-iron code of morals. Without that, progress is simply movement, and movement in a circle is not progress.
In our time, we've built something called social media. It is a place where hundreds of millions of people gather every day to share their beliefs, signal their virtues, denounce their enemies, and compete for approval. There are ideas that cannot be questioned. People who say the wrong thing are publicly shamed and excluded. And the most powerful currency is not money or talent, it is moral standing in the eyes of the crowd.
You have built a church.
That's not what we call it.
No, but that is what it is. You have dogmas that cannot be questioned. You have heretics who are cast out. You have public confession, though you call it accountability. You have indulgences, the performance of visible virtue to purchase social forgiveness. You have excommunication, you call it cancellation. And you have a congregation that is desperately, ferociously looking for something to believe in. The only thing missing is God, which is precisely why it is so unstable. A church without God has no source of mercy. It can only punish. It cannot forgive, because forgiveness requires a standard above the congregation itself. And without that, the congregation eventually turns on itself.
That is uncomfortably accurate.
It was always going to happen. When I wrote that the man who stops believing in God believes in anything, I did not mean he becomes frivolous. I meant he becomes fanatical. The religious instinct does not disappear. It finds a new object. And a fanaticism without transcendence, without humility, without the corrective of something greater than itself, is more dangerous than any orthodoxy, because it has no mechanism for self-correction, no confession, no absolution, only the permanent revolution of the righteous against the newly discovered sinner.
You also said something that I think lands even harder today, that the modern revolutionist, by rebelling against everything, loses his right to rebel against anything. Explain that.
With pleasure. The man who says all morality is a social construction, that there is no objective right or wrong, only power and preference, cannot then turn around and tell me that injustice is wrong. He has already surrendered the only weapon with which injustice can be fought. He goes to the political meeting and says savages should not be treated as beasts, then goes to the philosophy lecture and argues that they practically are beasts. He attacks men for trampling on morality, and then attacks morality for trampling on men. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything. The man who believes in nothing has no ground on which to stand when something truly matters.
And progress itself, you were suspicious of that word too.
Deeply. Fallacies do not cease to be fallacies because they become fashions. And progress is the great fashion of the modern age, cited constantly, defined never. Progress toward what? In what direction? The moment you are in the least doubtful about the direction, you become in the same degree doubtful about the progress. A man running very fast in the wrong direction is not making progress. He is making haste toward a cliff.
And your answer to all of this is orthodoxy, which is a word most people associate with dusty, safe, boring religion. But you describe it as the most exciting adventure available to a human mind.
Because it is. There never was anything so perilous or so exciting as orthodoxy. People have fallen into this foolish habit of speaking of it as something heavy and humdrum and safe. But to hold the orthodox position, to affirm both justice and mercy, both the freedom of man and the sovereignty of God, both grief and joy, that requires the balance of a man on a galloping horse. The heresies are always easier. It is always easy to let the age have its head. The difficult thing, the genuinely brave thing, is to keep one's own. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die.
Let's talk about the accusation that most people use against Christianity today, that it is irrational, that science has replaced it, that a modern, educated person simply cannot believe.
An imbecile habit has arisen in modern controversy of saying that such and such a creed can be held in one age, but cannot be held in the 20th century. You might as well say that a certain philosophy can be believed on Mondays, but cannot be believed on Tuesdays. But let us take the actual argument. It is said that reason has replaced faith. I would point out that reason is itself a matter of faith. It is an act of faith to believe that our thoughts have any relation to reality at all. The moment you trust your own reasoning, you have made an act of faith. The question is not faith versus reason. The question is which faith is most reasonable. And I will add this. It is still bad taste to be an avowed atheist. But now it is equally bad taste to be an avowed Christian, which tells you something interesting about where the real courage lies.
If you had one thing to say to someone today who is curious about Christianity but finds it intellectually embarrassing, who thinks it is for people who haven't thought hard enough, what would you say?
I would say the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. And here is what I would ask that person. You say you cannot believe because you have thought too hard. But have you ever considered the possibility that you have not yet thought hard enough? Most of the people who abandoned Christianity did so not at the peak of their reasoning, but somewhere in the middle of it. I would invite them to keep going. The road is longer than they think, and what is at the end of it is worth the walk. A dead thing can go with the stream. Only a living thing can go against it.
G.K. Chesterton. The man who outthought the skeptics by reading them more carefully than they read themselves. If you have never read Orthodoxy, and it is only 200 pages, clear a weekend. It will rearrange your furniture. See you tomorrow.